Okay, British Empire still. Can you tell? I knew that this was going to be long. It usually takes me like 4 days in class. But today we're going to deal with China and India. Okie dokie. Okay, and then the last video tomorrow will be all Africa. All right, so China first. If I zoom in here, vroom, what you see with China is that China stays independent of England, right? Uh-uh. One of your vocab words is economic imperialism, where you don't actually take over the whole country, but you have control of them economically. Yeah, that's what's happening here with China. That being said, England trades with China quite regularly. Okay. By the way, just a little side. Well, no. Okay, I'll tell you. Just a little side note. Like tea, we think of tea being so British. It's from China. Just a little side note. But so anyway, England starts especially trading something called opium. Opium is a type of drug. Opiate. Have you heard of those? Opiates. What the people? I have pictures. What people would do is like they would go into like an opium den. Um, I don't think of it like a legal crack house, I guess, and they would sit and smoke opium. Okay. A lot of their pipes like this were, a lot of them were in the shape of dragons and they were like really pretty and ornate and intricate designs and stuff. So a lot of the time, people would call smoking opium chasing the dragon. Well, anyway, the British are selling opium to the Chinese like crazy, and so much so that it starts hurting the economy and society. People are getting so high in China that like children are being abandoned, and not necessarily because the parents are bad people or whatever, but because they're so high they don't even realize they left their kid. So we're having massive orphan we're having an massive orphan issue. Um, People aren't going to work because they're high all the time. I think I have another picture. Oh, I thought I had two pictures of opium dens. Well, guess not. I'm positive I did. Guess not. So anyway, we have massive like problems happening. So eventually, the Chinese government goes to the English government and they say, "Look, we need you to quit. Stop with the opium trade." And England says, "No." Uh-uh. They say, "Tell your people to stop buying it. If your people wouldn't buy it, we wouldn't sell it." So it's actually not our fault. It's the Chinese people's fault. Again, I love England, but that's just ugh. Okay. That being said, eventually we're going to have a series of wars. They're called the Opium Wars. China versus England over whether or not you can trade opium. Well, obviously, China doesn't win. People are high. Like it's a mess. So China ends up losing big time. And whenever China loses, remember the winner of a war always, finish the sentence, gets something. China's like, "Okay, we know that you want us. Just go ahead and take us over." England's like, "I don't want control of you. You're too big." England does understand that she can't spread herself too thin. Okay. Also, the Chinese economy is not pretty. England's like, "I don't want that mess." What England does want are two big deal ports. The most important being Hong Kong. Uh oh. There we go. Hong Kong is down here. Okay. Um, the deal that is struck, the deal that is made, is that England will physically own and control the island of Hong Kong. They'll have the port of Hong Kong, okay, for 100 years. Why 100 years? I don't know. They just picked it. I don't know. So anyway, after 100 years, Hong Kong would revert back to China. I have to tell you something. Story time. I remember when that happened. I didn't understand it. It was 1997, I think. Did I put the date on here? Yes, the date is on your notes. 1997, and I was in college. And I remember like watching news stories where Chinese, like people my age, like college age Chinese people speaking almost British accent English. We're saying we don't want to go back to China, because if we revert back to China, that means we're communists, right? So Hong Kong is kind of in this weird situation even still today. But I do remember this happening, guys. We're in the 1800s, but y'all, that's not that long ago. Something that I remember in my lifetime, and I'm not that old, okay? Something that I remember in my lifetime, the cause was this right here. The the port of Hong Kong is going to be not Chinese. The port of Hong Kong is going to be English for 100 years, which gives England obviously control over the economy in South. What is this? China. Um, China is also going to be economically um, dependent on England. That's economic imperialism, where England doesn't actually physically own China, although they do have Hong Kong. They don't physically own China, but they do control their economy. And one of the things that England does, this is so shocking to me. One of the things that England does, whenever they win these wars, it's called extraterritoriality. It's like the craziest, longest word ever. Did I put it in your notes? I did. It's in your notes, it says extraterritorial. That's fine. So extraterritoriality or extraterritorial rights. Basically what that means is England and her allies, so like us, France, right? England and her allies can go into China and trade whenever we want. And here's the kicker. We don't have to follow Chinese laws. Is that fair to do to a country? We could go into China and do whatever we wanted. Literally, whatever we wanted. That's extraterritorial rights. That's not okay. If you think about that, that's not very nice. And there's a lot of Chinese people that were like, Europeans, get out. And we, America, we are lumped in with Europeans at this point. Okay. That being said, we have a lot of islands right here. Okay. The biggest bunch of them is the Philippines right here. But we are lumped in. Whenever I say Chinese people want the Europeans out, they want us out too. One of the big, and there's a whole bunch of little revolts, but one of the big revolts that a whole group of Chinese students took part in is called the Boxer Rebellion. They were like students who were like boxers, and the boxers wanted us Europeans gone. They wanted the Europeans out of China. It wasn't a successful revolt, and actually a lot of the Chinese were slaughtered. It was a terrible thing. But just understand, it's not like the Chinese just laid down and were like, okay, take us over, whatever. They put up as much of a fight as they could. But look at this. India. Okay, today this is more than just India. Today it's a whole bunch of countries. You have Pakistan over here, Burma. We hear a lot about Burma over here. So there's a lot more than just India, but this is India basically. Okay, is that what's next in your notes? Yes. Okay. India was called the jewel in the British crown because India had a ton of precious stones. Did you notice? India had a ton of precious stones. I'm sure they still have some, but most of their precious stones, their gems, are now sitting here. Huh. And again, y'all, I do love England, but I told you they're not going to look so great in the 1800s. Okay. That being said, once a lot of the precious gems and stuff are discovered in India, England goes over and takes them over. Well, originally, England was very kind of chill with India, and they had what's called indirect rule, which means they had some freedoms and stuff. Well, there was something that England was allowing them to do. There's a group of people called the Sepoy, Sepoy, Sepoy. The Sepoy were Indian men, native Indian men, who were allowed to be part of the British Empire. No, the British military. I'm sorry. So it was like groups of Indian men who were in the British military. Okie dokie. The Sepoy were like the special, the elite, the best of the best military men who, again, were given the distinction of not just being part of like the Indian military, but the British military. Like they were part of the British military, which is that's a big deal. However, go back in your happy little heads to like, oh my gosh, September last year, last semester, whatever. I guess it was last year, wasn't it? What religion are most Indians? Hindu. How do the Hindu feel about certain animals? Like, I don't know, certain animals that represent Shiva, the cow, pigs. There are animals that are sacred to Hindu. Okay. And there was a situation where, okay, think about the guns. These are the old school guns, again, where you still have to like, right? Um, they would grease the inside of the barrel of the gun, typically with animal fat. All right. Um, I'm sorry, my brain just left. My dog just came in and my brain went totally elsewhere. So anyway, they would grease the inside of the barrel of the gun, typically with pig fat. And like Muslims can't eat pig either. Pakistan, Muslims. So there's a lot of issues here. Um, the English said, we're not giving the sepoy pig. It's not pig fat. We don't know if they did or not. Okay, let me change that. I don't know if they did or not. I read something recently that said they were giving it to them, and I was like, really? Because I thought historians didn't know. So I don't know. Maybe historians have found something that they were giving them pig fat. But the last I heard, ooh, there was some crazy wind. The last I heard, we didn't really know if they were giving pig fat or not. Regardless, the Sepoy revolt, with the Sepoy revolting, it's called the Sepoy Mutiny or the Sepoy Revolt. When the Sepoy revolt and they like use British tactics and British training to fight the British are like, oh, heck no. And of course, unfortunately, the Sepoy are not successful and they get like quashed big time. And the British are going to come down hard on India. As a result, they go from like indirect rule to very harsh direct rule, where the English are like bringing down the hammer on the Indians. They also are forced to start. Come here, baby. They also are forced to start doing cash crops instead of food crops. Okay, come here. I'm sorry. Um, it's okay. He's afraid to come underneath the table. It's all right, baby. So anyway, the the Indians are starving, but I mean they're making a whole lot of cotton for the British. Um, things are terrible for them, but England is doing her duty, the great white man's burden. And England is spreading technology and industrialization and stuff like that. So they are starting railroads. They are allowing schools, British schools in India, and only Aryan kids can go to these British schools. Here's a picture of like a young Indian boy that went to one of these British schools. He's Indian, but do you see how he's very in, sorry, he's Indian, but he's very Anglicanized. He's very English. All right. He looks like he's going to an English school. These were actually English schools where they're learning English, they're learning everything about England. Um, this same young man is right here. where he went to university in England, like actually physically in England. He went to university and he studied law. That matters. His name is Mohandas Gandhi. Um, Mohandas Gandhi, I love this story because England trained him and then he like used what he learned against them. That being said, same boy, okay? He becomes a lawyer in England, an actual physical lawyer in England. Okay, and while he's in England, he's studying and he comes across some stuff in the Magna Carta that he's kind of like, and he comes across some stuff in the English Bill of Rights that he's like, and I told you this is going to bite England in the booty over and over and over again. There's this part of the Magna Carta that says no taxation without representation. Well, Mohandas Gandhi is like, where's the Indian representation in Parliament? Which one of you Parliament men is representing India? Because I don't think you are. And once Gandhi starts looking into how the British are treating the Indians, he's like, mm-mm. And so he moves back to India, and then that's where you start seeing him the way you're used to seeing him. This is him as an old man. Gandhi will live out the rest of his life in India, pushing for Indian independence. Now, they're not going to get independence from from England until I believe it's 1948. I know it's after World War II. So, yes, we've jumped ahead. It just makes sense to go ahead and talk about this now. But they're not going to get independence until after World War II. All right. But here's the thing, Gandhi, especially, uses what's called nonviolent resistance. When they do sit-ins, which they would just sit down in the middle of the field and not farm their crops. They would just sit. British soldiers, and I'm sorry to badmouth, but it's true. British soldiers would come and like kick them and spit on them and yell at them and hit them with the butts of their guns and all kinds of stuff. And what did he and his men do? Nothing. Non-violent resistance. They resisted, but they didn't act out. Think about how hard that is. That's a lot. That's like what the civil rights did in the 1960s with Martin Luther King Jr. So I mean that's hard to do. And see, here's the thing. We're gonna start having what's called newsreels. Not TVs yet, but whenever you went to a movie theater, they would show like a newsreel at the beginning of the movie. And there would be newsreels coming from this. And Americans were seeing British soldiers spitting on Indians who were doing nothing. Now, from the British point of view, yeah, they're doing nothing. They're supposed to be farming. Okay, I know, but they're doing nothing. And us, America, we're very strong in this idea of natural rights. Remember, life, liberty, property, pursuit of happiness. Are you taking away someone's right to liberty when you're doing that to them? Maybe. Are you taking away someone's right to property when you're doing that to them? Property is their body? Yeah, absolutely. Could you take away someone's right to life? Well, yeah, I mean, if you hit them hard enough, okay. And are you definitely taking away their right to happiness? Pursue that which makes them happy? Happy? You like that? Happy? Yeah, probably. I mean, I don't know, but it would not make me happy if you spit on me. Okay. If you kicked me, if you hit me with the butt of your gun, we in America start seeing these newsreels of our ally, our friends, England, and we're like, what? We help put a lot of pressure on England along with all of his nonviolent resistance. He's actually, because of all his like sit-ins and stuff, he's causing it or England to hurt economically in India because they're not doing as much farming as they used to. So eventually England will let India go. And India, why do I keep messing them up? India will get her freedom. I don't know if I put it. Yeah, I didn't put the date on your notes, so I don't know the date for sure, but it is after World War II. It's shortly after World War II, which ends in 1945. So it's before 1950 that they got their independence. Okay, okay. The next video is Africa. We're gonna just divide up Africa like crazy between all of the European powers. Okie dokie, and then that's it. Imperialism done. Bye, guys.